Maddie, welcome along to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're talking about your column, Want to Buy Your Child Anxiety, Get Them a Smartphone. That's the title. And in your piece, you compare drugs and alcohol to smartphones. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, how can these be comparable?
Well, that is true. They're different things. One's, drugs and alcohol, very physical effects. Smartphones have very non-physical effects, you could say. But they do have quite similar results when used for long periods of time and abused. We're seeing that rates of anxiety and depression and self-harm are going up, not just in New Zealand, but across the developed world. And effects of drugs and alcohol when used for young people and abused also include things like, decreased cognitive abilities, and also major social effects as well, like social to the detriment of people really as well. So they're not the same thing, but they do have, detrimental effects that we should be aware of and be careful of.
So you're basically saying that drugs and alcohol have a certain effect on the brain. Smartphones have another similar effect. They're not exactly the same. They can be compared. What actually lies at the heart of this issue of adolescent mental health and the fact that it's in such a poor state? Because smartphones, they're a technology, but inherently in and of themselves, is there anything about them that make them harmful for children? Or, speak to that.
Well, smartphones have internet access. You're able to take them with you wherever you want to go, and you have access now to almost everybody in the entire world. You almost have like a substitute for connectedness. You don't need your friends in person. You can just have them online. And that seems to have, really terrible effects for socialization for kids. They're not, going outside as much. They're spending much more time on the internet. But then other things as well, because they're spending more time on the internet, it's a more addictive. It is addictive, the internet, social media. It's designed to keep you scrolling, to keep you on it.
We've had the internet for a while now. What is it about this time that is particularly alarming?
Well, we see the anxiety and depression rates go up around 2010, and then they start to rise really, really quickly.
That's interesting. I think I remember some important technology coming out around that time.
Well, in about 2007 is when smartphones become available. iPhone is invented.
That really, wow.
And then by like 2013, you have Instagram on almost every smartphone. Like everyone can have access to Instagram. So people have had the internet. They can spend a lot of time on the internet, but you used to have to go to your own home and be on your own computer, and you were only able to do whatever you wanted there, but now you can take it with you. So that seems to be the catalyst for this massive increase in anxiety and depression.
So rather than just smartphones in general, you're actually putting your finger on social media as one of the key issues?
I think so. I think you can't look at smartphones without social media. So they're really connected. But at the same time, you have like increased texting, and people, are able to contact people far more easily once they have a portable smartphone, or at least a cell phone. But you can't really take them separately. They are, the same. And if we're really wanting to you can't really just address the problem of social media without addressing the problem of the smartphone as well, which I think is what the National Party have done with their smartphone ban in schools. You can't ban social media use really, but you can ban the smartphone. You can much more easily able to, create measures around that.
So at a time where technology is facilitating connections around the world, we're actually seeing loneliness, disconnectedness, all of these things. So do you think that suggests something about the quality of relationships being had, mediated via technology?
Yeah, I think it's definitely true. Technology connects us amazingly, but the connection is not the same as having someone in person. We definitely saw this through lockdown when we were all on Zoom together, but it was not the same as being in person. And I think everyone really felt that.
The US Surgeon General called for tobacco-style warnings on social media. What do you think that would look like?
I don't really know. I think I don't know how you would put like pictures of social media, like detrimental effects onto social media. It's kind of what we want to avoid is some of those like really damaging pictures. But I guess the essence of his claim is like, this is just as bad as tobacco. We've taken such a strong stance there and we've seen results. So we need to do something similar. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly what it would look like.
So say we institute these warnings, do you think that would then make a difference? Because there are some kids who are hopelessly addicted to their phones, possibly to social media. And we know for smokers, right, if they're hooked, it doesn't matter what's on the packaging, they're going to continue to smoke. That's not going to be enough by itself. So what are some other sort of solutions that may support, maybe enhance education around the harms or dangers of social media?
I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to in the column. Like, it seems the problem is so widespread. Kids are addicted in many cases, and parents find it hard to put boundaries in place for their kids.
Isn't it simply a case of just saying, actually, no, little Timmy, this is the limit?
I don't know if it is simply the case because, I've seen, like, at least anecdotal reports from researchers saying that, like, kids can get quite aggressive when you say, no, you can't use your phone now. And then also, I think it's really easy for kids to say, oh, but everyone else has one. Like, you, as a parent, it's very hard to say to your kid, no, we're not going to get you a smartphone and we're just going to let you use a brick phone like I had to use when I first got a phone. But yeah, instead of just being like, we give you a phone purely for communication purposes, kids now want like a fancy smartphone, an iPhone, and everyone else has them too. So they're so widespread. That's why I was sort of thinking maybe it is time for the government to say something that across the board is applied to everybody. So everyone is in the same position, that we're protecting all kids as best we can the same way.
What preliminary results have we seen from the current government's phone ban in schools?
I know particularly when it was first introduced in some schools at the start of the year, where they were sort of establishing their own policies within their own schools, they did start to see kids engage with one another. They weren't spending so much time on their phones during break times, but they were bringing packs of cards to play. Or, I know Marianne, the researcher here, knows someone who said that kids use skipping ropes at school again, which apparently kids weren't using for a while. Wow. And have been, for years and years have been stuck in the cupboard, but now being pulled out and being used to entertain themselves at lunchtimes. And I think the real effects for the purpose of the policy, which was education results, will be seen over time. But we are starting to see better engagement between students at school.
I can hear some in the audience going, well, okay, fine, the government puts these regulations out and everyone has to obey. But, I mean, even if you think about the instance of vulnerable kids in houses where things aren't running as they should, right? They're not getting the food they need. The government has a responsibility to those kids to ensure their needs are being met. If their parents aren't, meeting their obligations, well, the government should step in. And yet there are kids going without food on a daily basis. I know teachers who can go, yep, when kids come into the classroom, I can point to the number of kids who are coming without food because there's negligence there in parenting. So we've got a case of parental neglect of some kind, be it through malice or ignorance or whatever. When we're applying that to the cell phone ban, how would government regulation even help that? And are there some possible approaches the government could take to ensure that those moves they made were actually effective?
I think it is definitely a good point you make. The government, is supposed to meet all sorts of obligations that it can't feasibly meet, but we don't then take those obligations off the government, particularly around protection of children, right? Like if a child is in a dangerous situation at home, we expect the government to do something about it. But, there are kids in dangerous situations all across the country that the government hasn't done anything yet. But we have seen, in terms of what we could do for smartphones or social media, we have seen in some cases, some websites, like porn sites, will ask for ID. And so you need like a verified ID and then it'll let you in. And I'm not sure exactly how successful this is, but it seems that it's had success in the US. in some states where they've implemented this.
So tightening up controls, going directly after the social media companies and going, look, if you can run your company here in our country, but you have to have verified age-restricted access to the site in order to operate. You think that sort of...
That could be one way the government does it. I think, I'm not sure how you could implement restrictions across smartphones more generally. Maybe make it a restricted substance. You can't buy it unless you're over a certain age. But of course, it's parents that buy it for children. I'm not sure how that would happen. But I do understand the skepticism because it's not like an easy thing to do. Like, it's a quite big task for the government to take on. So I'm not sure exactly how it would work. Definitely in schools, as they're doing currently, is one way where the government has control or some sort of authority, much more than, say, in the home. But I know it would require a lot of thinking, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Maddie. We really appreciate your thoughts in the column. And yeah, it would be great to see gains made in this area as we begin to grapple with this issue.
Would you give your child a substance that you knew was going to cause them harm? The answer from any parent would be a resounding no. Yet nowadays, even children as young as 11 have access to supercomputers in the form of smartphones. At the same time, mental health issues among the young, such as anxiety disorders, depression, and suicidal thoughts, have risen significantly across the globe. It's interesting that the National Party has banned smartphones in classrooms because of poorer education outcomes. Indeed, smartphones have inhibited students' abilities to pay attention. They're distracting, highly addictive, and impact cognitive performance. But the problems are deeper than academic issues. Since about 2010, rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts in young people aged between 18 and 24 have increased more than 200%. These are the people whose childhoods have been characterized by constant internet connection, not to mention they have fewer friends and spend less time with their families. We are now seeing that the earlier smartphone use begins, the worse off one's well-being will be in the future. Just last week, the US Surgeon General called for tobacco-style warnings on social media because of its effects on adolescent mental health. Dr. Samantha Marsh has suggested that phones should be treated like other addictive substances, kept well away from children, starting with banning phones in schools. The skeptic in all of us, though, may whisper, will banning smartphones really work? Isn't it a parent's job to control the behaviour of their own children? Whatever parents are doing isn't working. Keeping children off the internet can feel like trying to keep them away from sunshine, almost impossible. When they try to do something, they are met with objection, if not physically aggressive behaviour. So it may be time for the government to step in. Parents can then tell their disgruntled kids, it's not me taking your phone, it's just the law. In his book, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt prescribes using only basic phones, no internet, limited apps, before 14, and no social media before 16. We already try to keep other harmful substances away from children. Why should smartphones be any different? For example, the side effects of marijuana include depression, social anxiety, thoughts of suicide, and suicide attempts, particularly after long-term use. Sound familiar? Even if people argue over marijuana being legalized, no one is suggesting that we distribute it to children. The same is true for alcohol. It limits our capacities for cognitive function, and the damage is worse when given to children, hence a legal drinking age. Skeptics will say again, how do we know that smartphones are causing this? This is all correlation. But Haidt argues causation. Even if it wasn't, wouldn't it be better to err on the side of caution? If we care for our children's well-being more than we care about their educational results, action against smartphone use needs to be taken everywhere, not just in schools.